from lines of credit at Goldman, Chase, AgTrust, Amarillo National, Pinnacle Bank.
The more we dig, the more loans we find. We just can't figure out how he's paying the loans.
Well, can't we just call Alan? Call Alan and ask him.
I've been calling him.
Most likely this is a strategy to limit tax liability, but the immediate problem is the funds don't exist in any of the accounts we've found to initiate the offshore drill.
Monty hid something so dangerous that he didn't just keep it off every computer, every server, every digital system. He kept it hidden from the one person he trusted most, his own wife. And now, that secret is sitting in Cammie's hands. And she is so terrified of what's inside those documents that she did the one thing she swore she would never do. She walked straight back to the man she destroyed. This Season 3 trailer just changed everything. Let me show you why. Let's be very clear about something before we go any further. Because most people watched Landman Season 2 and thought they understood what happened. They thought Cammie made a bad business decision. They thought she fired a good employee at the wrong time. They thought it was a mistake she could eventually recover from. But that is not what happened. What Cammie did when she fired Tommy was not a bad decision. It was a demolition. She did not remove a person from a position. She pulled out the single load-bearing wall that was holding the entire structure up. And she had absolutely no idea that's what she was doing. That is what makes it so devastating. Because here is the thing people consistently underestimate about Tommy. His role at MTX was never about the title. It was never about the office or the salary or the position on an org chart. Tommy was not managing MTX. Tommy was the reason MTX functioned at the level it did. And those are two completely different things. Think about what that actually means in practice. Every relationship that had been built over decades in that industry, every contract that had context behind it that went deeper than what was written on paper, every decision that looked strange on the surface but made complete sense if you understood the history. Tommy was the living memory of all of it. He did not just know how to do the job. He knew why certain things were done a certain way. He knew which relationships needed to be maintained, even when they seemed unnecessary. He knew which decisions had consequences that would not show up for months. That kind of knowledge cannot be written down. It cannot be transferred in a handover meeting. It lives in a person, and that person was Tommy. Monty understood this completely. That is exactly why their partnership worked for as long as it did. Monty was the face, the vision, the name that commanded respect the moment he walked into any room in that industry. But Tommy was the infrastructure underneath all of it, the thing that made Monty's vision actually executable. And when Cammie inherited MTX, she inherited both of them. She had Monty's legacy on one side and Tommy's operational genius holding that legacy together on the other. That combination, if she had protected it, if she had leaned into it instead of treating it like a threat, would have made her virtually untouchable. Nobody could have touched her. Not competitors, not rivals, nobody. She had everything she needed to not just survive, but completely dominate. But Cammie's problem was never incompetence. That is the part that makes her arc in Season 2 so painful to watch in hindsight. She is not a stupid woman. She understands this industry. She is sharp and she is driven. And in a different version of this story, she is genuinely dangerous in all the right ways. But she walked into MTX carrying something that quietly destroyed every good decision before she could make it. She was terrified. Not of failing. Not of the competition. She was terrified of being seen as just Monty's widow. Terrified that every success MTX had under her would be credited to the people Monty left behind. That every good quarter, every strong deal, every moment of stability would come with an asterisk. She built it on Monty's foundation. She had Tommy holding it together. It was not really her. And that fear, that very specific and very human fear, turned every piece of professional guidance Tommy offered into a personal attack she had to defend herself against. Every time Tommy flagged something, she heard it as a challenge to her authority. Every time he pushed back on a direction she was taking, She heard it as another person in that building who did not fully believe she belonged in that seat. And rather than sit with that discomfort and work through it, she kept pushing back harder, kept making moves designed to prove independence, to show the industry, to show the people around her, to show herself that she was in control and she did not need anyone standing behind her holding things up. And then came the firing. And this is the moment that needs to be understood completely. Because this was not a performance issue. Tommy had not done anything wrong. He was doing exactly what Tommy always does. He was showing up, telling the truth, flagging a damage before it became irreparable, trying to protect the company from a decision that he could already see was going to cause serious problems. And Cammy sat across from him and let him go. Like he was replaceable. Like the position and the person were two separate things, and she could just slide someone else into that role and nothing would change. So she called Nate immediately after, offered him Tommy's job, and Nate said no. And that refusal should have told Cammy absolutely everything. When someone who knows both parties that well, who understands the inner workings of that company as deeply as Nate does, looks at that offer and walks away, that is not loyalty to Tommy. That is a verdict on the situation. That is someone telling you, without saying a single word directly, you do not understand what you just broke. But Cammy could not hear it. Not yet. And so the cracks started. Quietly. Slowly. In ways that were easy to explain away at first, and completely impossible to ignore later. Now let's talk about what Tommy did after that door got slammed in his face. Because this is where the story stops being about Cammy's mistakes and starts being about something far more powerful. And I need you to understand this clearly. Tommy did not sit down. Tommy did not feel sorry for himself. Tommy did not spend a single day waiting for Cammy to realize what she had done and come crawling back with an apology. He took every single thing she threw away. Every relationship, every piece of credibility, every favor owed, and every trust earned over years of doing the work right, and he stacked it all into the foundation of something entirely new. CTT did not happen because Tommy got lucky. CTT happened because Tommy is exactly the kind of person who, when the world closes one door, builds an entirely new building on the other side of the wall. Think about what that actually required. He was not starting from zero, but he also was not starting with safety. He was starting with nothing institutional behind him. No brand, no existing contracts, no name on a building that carried decades of industry weight. What he had was relationships, real ones. The kind that are built over years of showing up consistently, delivering on your word, and never playing people against each other for personal gain. Those relationships, the ones Cammy assumed were attached to the MTX name rather than to Tommy personally, followed him. Because here is the truth about how this industry actually works. People do not stay loyal to a company. People stay loyal to the person inside the company who never lied to them. And Tommy had spent years being that person. So when he left, they left with him. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, quietly, in exactly the way that a company starts losing its foundation before anyone in the building notices the floor is shifting. And while CTT was being built, MTX was doing exactly what any structure does when you remove its most critical support. It was cracking. Not collapsing overnight, not in a way that made headlines immediately, but in the slow, compounding way that internal damage always works. Small deals that did not close the way they should have. Relationships that started to feel a little colder than before. Decisions that needed someone with deep contextual knowledge to make correctly, and that knowledge was no longer in the building. Every single week that passed, the gap between what MTX was under Monty and what it was becoming under Cammy was getting wider. And every single week that passed, CTT was getting stronger. But then came the moment that made everything official. Galino's $44 million. And I want you to sit with that number for a second because it is not just a financial figure. It is a statement. Galino did not get to where he is by writing emotional checks. He is not a man who invests in people because he likes them or because he wants to do someone a favor. He is calculated in a way that most people in this industry are not even close to. He sees angles 3 moves ahead. He assesses risk with a precision that borders on cold. And when he looked at the entire landscape, when he put MTX on one side and CTT on the other, when he evaluated everything that was currently in motion between these two operations, he put his name and his money behind Tommy. $44 million worth of clarity on exactly who he believes is running the future of this industry and who is running its past. That is not a small signal. In the world this show operates in, that is one of the loudest possible statements a man like Galino can make. It tells every other serious player in that space exactly where the balance of power has moved. It tells the market, it tells the competition, and most devastatingly of all, it tells Cammy. Because Cammy does not just have to watch Tommy build something real from the rubble of her decision, she has to watch the most powerful investor in their world look at both options and choose him, without hesitation. That is not a business loss, that is a public verdict, and it lands in a way that no argument, no quarterly report, no boardroom confrontation ever could. So heading into Season 3, the scoreboard looks like this. CTT is rising. Galino is fully behind it. MTX is weakened in ways that are no longer easy to paper over. And Cammy is holding documents that Monty hid so carefully that even she had no idea they existed. Documents that scared her badly enough to do the one thing she swore she would never do again. But here is what nobody is asking loudly enough yet. Galino just put $44 million into Tommy's company. And Monty had a history with Galino that apparently needed to stay completely buried. So what happens when those two facts collide? What happens when the documents Cammy is carrying turn out to be directly connected to the man who is now funding everything Tommy just built? Because if that is where this is going, and the trailer is strongly suggesting that it is, then Tommy is not just navigating a complicated reunion with the woman who fired him. He is about to find out that the ground CTT is standing on might not be as solid as he thinks. Let's talk about those documents. Because every power shift, every crumbling wall at MTX, every dollar Galino put into CTT, all of it eventually leads back to this. A stack of physical papers that a very careful, very deliberate, very calculated man decided needed to exist completely outside of any system that could be accessed, traced, or compromised. No digital copy, no electronic record, no backup sitting on a server somewhere waiting to be subpoenaed or hacked, or accidentally forwarded to the wrong person. Just paper, hidden so completely that the woman who shared his life, his home, his bed, had absolutely no idea they existed until after he was gone. And when you understand who Monty was, when you understand how precisely that man operated, that detail alone should stop you cold. Because Monty was not careless, ever. Everything we know about him across 2 seasons of this show tells us he was someone who thought 10 steps ahead of every situation he was in. He understood that in the oil and gas industry, information is not just power. Information is survival. The right piece of information at the right moment can close a deal that should have been impossible. The wrong piece of information in the wrong hands can end a career, collapse a company, or do something significantly worse than either of those things. Monty knew that better than almost anyone alive in that world. He had spent decades navigating it. So when a man with that level of awareness, that level of calculated precision, decides to keep something on paper only, no emails, no texts, no digital trail of any kind, he is not being cautious. He is being terrified. He is making a decision that says, if this ever gets into a system, I am finished, and not just professionally. So the question that should be keeping you up at night is simple. What is actually in those papers? Because the show has been laying breadcrumbs for anyone paying close enough attention, and when you line them up, the picture they form is deeply uncomfortable. We know Monty built MTX into a major operation over decades, and we know that kind of success in this industry does not happen by playing everything clean and above board every single time. There are deals that happen away from cameras in boardrooms, agreements made with a handshake in a room where nobody is taking notes and nobody is supposed to remember. Arrangements that exist in that gray area between legitimate business and something that cannot survive exposure to daylight. Monty operated in that world long enough to know exactly where those lines were, and long enough to know exactly when he had crossed them. Now bring Galino into this, because Galino was not a new character in Monty's story. He was part of that world long before he ever became part of Tommy's. And Galino is not a simple investor. He is not someone who writes a check and waits for quarterly updates. He is deeply embedded in how things actually work at the level where most people are not even allowed in the room. The deals that do not get announced. The arrangements that never make it into any filing. The agreements between powerful men that are understood completely by both parties and documented by neither. If Monty and Galino had a history that went beyond what anyone publicly knows, if there were arrangements between them that Monty felt needed to stay completely and permanently off the record, those are exactly the kind of documents that end up hidden exactly the way these were hidden. Physical only, no trace, not even to the person closest to him. And that possibility changes the entire Season 3 landscape in a way that is almost difficult to fully absorb. Because Tommy just built his entire company on Galino's foundation. CTT exists because Galino believed in Tommy enough to write that $44 million check. Everything Tommy sacrificed, everything he rebuilt from scratch after Cammy fired him, everything he fought for and finally achieved, it all runs directly through Galino. That is not a minor connection. That is the central artery of everything CTT is. And if those documents reveal something about Galino that reframes who he actually is and what he actually wants from the people around him, Tommy is not just dealing with a complicated business situation anymore. He is standing on ground that was never as stable as it looked, and he had no way of knowing it. Now add Nate into this equation. Because Nate's reaction to those documents is the detail that elevates this from a buried secret to an active threat. Nate is one of the most careful and measured people in this entire story. He does not speak carelessly. He does not throw out suggestions without thinking through exactly what those suggestions mean and what they might set in motion. So when Nate looked at what Cammy brought him, when he saw what those documents were pointing at and told her to dig deeper, that was not casual advice. That was not a general encouragement to be thorough. That was a man who recognized something specific in those pages, something that connected to a larger story he at least partially understood. And the fact that Nate, who now stands firmly on Tommy's side, who made his choice when he refused Cammy's job offer and has not looked back since, the fact that this man looked at those documents and said, "Go further," means whatever is buried in them is not a story from the past that has no bearing on the present. It is connected to something that is still moving, still active, still completely capable of causing catastrophic damage right now, in the present, to people who are currently in